Guys, I'm tired. That Court of Owls video took a really long time to make, it was a little bit exhausting, and now I have to work on part 2, so you know what, this video is just gonna be really relaxing. We're gonna talk about something that's so simple, so straightforward that even I couldn't get worked up about it, jumping in video games. That's it, just jumping. You're in a game, you press X, you jump, or of course A or spacebar, or whatever button corresponds to the platform you're playing on. Outside of walking around, it's one of the most basic and widely used aspects of movement in games, which is why it's so consistent in the industry and why it's what I wanted to focus this relaxing, simple video on. You press X and you jump. I guess that's it. Except, I mean, obviously in some games you can hold jump to go a bit higher than if you just press it, but that's just a small tweak though. Also, I guess that holding jump can be executed in a few different ways. The game can just reduce gravity to maintain a bit of a smooth, realistic curve, or it can kill your momentum the second you let go of the button, or you can have two non-continuous jump heights so you always hit those points, you can't stop halfway between them, but you know what, that's fine. It's not a big deal. For the most part, jumping in games is always the same. I hate to keep adding to this, honestly, but I did just realize that a lot of fighting games don't actually use buttons to jump. You do it automatically if you flick the joystick up so they can use the maximum amount of buttons for mapping out combos, and come to think of it, some games don't have jumping at all. Maybe they'll have interactables that you can vault or climb, maybe you can jump but only in predetermined areas, but jumping outside of those interactables isn't doable. Also, you know what? Let me get this off my chest real quick. Why do some games have the weirdest control schemes? I thought we realized decades ago that this button at the bottom would be responsible for jumping, and that was final. But all of a sudden, Kingdom Hearts comes in with circle to jump, Rockstar says no, square is the jump button, Skyrim says nah, meet me up top for some reason. I get that this button is up, so in a way it makes sense, up, jump, but at the same time, why would jump be the button with the farthest tracking distance from the analog sticks? And yeah, I know that most games let you remap controls, it's not the end of the world, but it does bother me that this was the default setting, that the game's taking the official stance that L1 and R1 is an intuitive way to jump. Like, don't come at me with that kind of energy. God of War 2018 sets the button that corresponds to your leap as circle and dodge as X, and when I went to switch those around, the game denoted my new control scheme as flipped, which made me irrationally angry. How dare you tell me that circle to dodge and X to jump is flipped? Who do you think you are? God of War is also one of the games that limits your jumping ability to only the moments where the game says, alright, you can jump now, and I get it, let's be serious, no spamming jump allowed, that's too silly, but looking over at God of War's PlayStation brother, The Last of Us, we can see just how much more free and open the combat encounters became in 2 compared to the more stiff movement in 1, partially because of the addition of the jump button. It just felt like Ellie was more nimble and agile. I'm not saying it needs to be in every game, but it is kind of funny that this man can't jump until he's asked to casually hop over a giant chasm from time to time. If we're talking Naughty Dog though, we gotta mention Uncharted, because this game and other swashbuckling adventures like it employ a heavy use of jumping in their set pieces. Sometimes big, crazy action ones that feel grand and epic, and sometimes in their climbing segments, which are basically just asking you to jump through a predetermined path. All you do is hold a direction, Nate will reach towards a ledge, and then you press jump to hop over to it. It gets more exciting in 4 when you can chain in slides and grapples, but for all intents and purposes, this is essentially linear, guided 3D platforming. I love these games, but part of me thinks that parkour is actually a lot better when the game ditches jumping altogether or employs it sparingly. Assassin's Creed games allow you to clamber up cliff faces and massive buildings in one fluid motion. Your character will just automatically leap from ledge to ledge, and in a game like Shadow of Mordor, you can do the same, but with some helpful magic and timing. Pressing the jump button when coming in contact with a ledge shoots you upwards at high speeds, which does a really good job balancing fluid automatic movement with user-controlled jumping inputs. It's kind of hard to talk about parkour without also having to bring up wall jumping, which isn't even exclusive to games with parkour in them. It's usually just a skill you acquire or something your character can do from the beginning. But while some games use the concept in the same way that a gravity-defying parkour artist would, kicking off one wall to make it to the other games give you full control in midair. You'll jump on a wall, start sliding downwards, and then jump again, potentially back to the same wall in a curved motion, which, okay, now we have to talk about air control, because some games let you move around and turn in the air, and in some cases even allow you to perform mid-air dashes, even when it doesn't make any sense. Like, yeah, I get when crazy mountain magic is potentially responsible for Madeline's air dashing abilities in Celeste, but why can I air dash in Steel Rising? I am a robot, but it doesn't look like I have any thrusters. I just kind of flap my little robot wings and dash backwards. You just sort of accept it. It's also pretty funny that newer Souls-likes have air dashing and dedicated jump buttons, even horse jumps, because if we're gonna have a chat about jumping in video games, we need to talk about the literal demon spawn that mapped out From Software's buttons before Sekiro. Demon Souls has no jump whatsoever, so in response, I'm guessing Miyazaki sat down and asked his team, hey guys, how are we gonna solve this impossible jumping problem? So as a joke, somebody says, what if you could jump, but only during a sprint? And another employee chimes in, yeah, and how about we make it the same button as sprint and dodge too? And as the room fills with laughter, Miyazaki begins to levitate in the air as he reaches true enlightenment, which is how I assume we wound up with the system where you can only jump if you hold circle to sprint and then let go and then quickly tap circle again, but be careful, because if you sprint towards a boss or an enemy and then quickly press circle to dodge, you just did the jumping sequence, enjoy your 0 iframes. And after a couple of goes at this, the team comes over to Miyazaki and says, hey man, we were just goofing around, we didn't think you'd take us serious, but we're all the way to Bloodborne now and we still have this janky jumping system, this has gotta change. And so he says, alright fine, jumping is now sprinting and L3. I repeat, the jump button in Dark Souls 3 is hold circle, move forward, and then press L3. It took 33 years for From Software to realize that jump could just be one button on your goddamn controller. It was pretty wild then replaying Bloodborne at the same time that I was playing through Severed Steel. On one hand, I needed to solve the Grothendieck cat's P curvature conjecture to hop on this little rock, and on the other hand, I needed to constantly jump for almost the sole purpose of performing mid-air skills in order to stay alive longer. Severed Steel lets you dodge bullets with dives, flips, and wall runs, which means that jumping is an imperative part of survival, and without jumping, the game's either impossible or very boring, which is interesting because most progression isn't locked off by verticality. This game doesn't need jumping the same way that a platformer does, it needs it for survival. Neon White lets you either use its cards as weapons or discard them to get extra movement options, usually jump related. So now all of a sudden jumps are part of a greater strategy and able to be stringed together for flashy movement. Fancy tricks are also just the sole purpose of jumping and skateboarding games. In fact, Roller Drum makes them even more crucial by only allowing you to reload your weapon through tricks, which are most often performed following jumps. Skateboarding games also have a lesser used version of the charge jumps, where instead of the jump happening immediately on pressing the button with you able to hold it for more airtime, you can hold the button to prepare for a jump and it only activates once you let go, with your height being dictated by the timing of the release and whether it matched up with the edge of whatever you're skating on. And speaking of edges, mantling. My brother mentioned this to me. I asked him about jumping in video games and he said, Destiny 1 didn't have a mantle, and I had to check if his head was screwed on right because I thought he was talking about this mantling, and I was like, wow, this kid's an idiot. But no, he meant when you're jumping towards an edge and how annoying it is that your character can't pull himself up, and he threatened to sue me for defamation if I didn't include this part. But you know what, if we're gonna bring up FPS games, especially in a competitive setting, we might as well talk about back paddles, because these are becoming more popular and may lead to a new wave of default controller layouts in the future, because people are realizing how annoying it is when you're trying to jump and turn at the same time. There is the claw grip method that also helps in the Souls games since you're able to sprint and control your camera simultaneously, but that gets pretty uncomfortable. So a lot of people get back paddle attachments to be able to press the jump button and turn the analog stick at the same time, which kind of exposed a glaring flaw in the common X to jump control scheme. Jumping is such a basic and crucial process that you'd hope you'd be able to multitask with it, and in some cases you just can't. Ghost Runner actually took this into account with its controller layout. It's hard to get adjusted to at first, but R1 is jump in this game, and you can change it, but I wouldn't recommend it because having R1 as jump completely frees up your thumb to stay on the thumbstick while jumping, which is really helpful in this tough parkour platforming action title, which means you may not actually need back paddles after all in Call of Duty. You can just get used to the shoulder button being jump and X being your equipment. But see, now I'm confused because I spent this whole time wondering why games stray away from the norm with their button mapping, but now I'm thinking that maybe another button would have been better this whole time. This kind of issue presents itself less in a 2D game since camera control with the right stick isn't really a thing, but most platformers still wind up having very different game feel regardless because developers won't use the same values for gravity, or they'll play around with the initial upwards force of your character. For example, a jump in Hollow Knight is about 3 times your height, it launches upwards, whereas Ori gets a maximum of twice the character's height. But then you look at their running jumps and you'll see that Ori is significantly more horizontal, almost 2 times more. The ratios are shown here, which if you think about it makes a lot of sense because Hollow Knight's platforming focuses on small ledges and precise landings, and Ori's focuses on long stretches and string together jumps and dashes. But when both games involve so much platforming, this significant change in the arc of the jump can really affect people's opinions. I do like Hollow Knight more overall as a game, but I think its platforming fundamentals are nowhere near as enjoyable as Ori's. There's a sense of fluidity and forward movement here, which starts with that push forwards instead of up. Whereas in comparison, Hollow Knight feels a little bit floaty to be honest, although it is helped a lot by the brilliant platforming design. You add in the fact that some games have different collision boxes for their platforms, with some letting you basically go all the way off the edge before jumping to make them seem more intense, and you start to realize that most platformers, or hell, most games in general, have a completely different take on jumping. From the physics, to the use cases, to the extra implementations, to the buttons, to even its existence altogether. But you know what? Besides all of that stuff, jumping is very straightforward and a simple concept to talk about. Oh wait, I forgot about double jumping.